and everything. Yeah, beginning to change. Yeah. That's how it's going to cover for a
last week, you phoned me up.
I think the main thing there, the whole slog is it's not massive. But I think it's going to be so interesting. And I think that it's for a long time. There's a lot of us about when the latter because it's living saying hot so I think one of the stories is that they shouldn't have any massive money to go. But this is it isn't really massive matter because it's just they think
I'm a shliach tonight of the whole Va'ad HaRabbanim which has been set up a few weeks ago after Rabbi Weiss was here. And I've been asked to welcome Rabbi Shimon Russell, who especially came this week back to England to mechazek us, to mo'ided us, and to enlighten us, to be Be'ezer Hashem, mechanech our children al Taras HaKodesh. A few weeks ago, we set up this Va'ad HaRabbanim, which has been active b'derech hatznius al pi HaTorah to try to prevent all kinds of different abuse which are happening in our killer and try to address them al pi HaTorah in the best possible way. Versteht sich, the issue is a very sensitive issue. It's an issue that has to be tackled very carefully and very individually. And Baruch Hashem, all what I can say is that the Hatzlacha has been tremendous and it's been done to help everybody here in town and the people who are relevant, who he was relevant to, and it's relevant to everybody. And my bakosha to the Boydin Shalom is that the Vad, which obviously with it should be able to Hashem carry on to be matzliach, to be meta our machane the way we want it to be. Today, Rabbi Shimon Russell is not going to address those cases which the Vada Rabbanim are dealing with. That belongs to the Rabbanim. Rabbi Shimon Russell's come here today to make an awareness, to help us to be aware and to protect our family and our children and our killer. The Tzibur, who came along, show already that we want to know, we want to be able to keep our houses and our town and our children toyer, which is already showing to the Boinei Shalom where our Ritzonos are. It's obvious that we are going to hear tonight surprises. And I assume that's what we came for, not to do chazor, I wanted to hear new things. Maybe in generations earlier, things were on the quiet, and one didn't have to speak so clearly and so explicitly in such a great hole like here. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not here now to explain different ways of understanding why today is different than before. And bichlal, is it different than before? But the facts are that if we're not going to hear, and the Gedolei Yisrael have said that clearly, if we're not going to hear clearly what the matzav is and what the issues are, we're not going to be able to look after our children properly. And how many parents who have heard and been made aware over the last 6 months from Rabbi Shimon when he spoke in a smaller setting, and they heard what he said, they came with tinus. Why didn't you come 10 years ago? You would have saved my children, you would have saved this situation and that situation if you would have known 10 years ago. So we're here tonight in order to try to make sure that we should not have the same claim and cry in the next 10 years. I just want to mention one Sefer Charedim on the Gemara, and then I'll give it over to Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara is an interesting Gemara with a Peledig Kasha on it. The Gemara says in Tanis, in Daf, I'll just tell you, Chav Gimel Amud Beis, you can go and check it up yourself. The Gemara says that we're talking there about Abba Chelkia. Kimot lebeisa, he came home after a long story. He came home from out of town, and he came with his wife and with Talmidei Chachomim, the Rabbanon, which came with him. And as the Gemara would say, these were Rabbanon, Talmidei Chachomim questioned all the actions which Abba Chelkia did. And the Gemara says, when he came to his home, the Gemara says, Kimot lebeisa ola dvisa bereisha. His wife went into the house first. V'hoda ayle ihu. Afterwards, he went into his house. V'hoda ayle Rabbanon. And afterwards, the Rabbanon entered the house. And the Gemara there later says that one of the things which his Rabbanon questioned all these maybe 10 actions which Abba Chelkia did was this question. Why do you let your wife go in first, and afterwards you went in, and afterwards you let us in? It's shloike derech, le'elech isha acha isha. Why do you tell your wife to go in first? So the Gemara says the following words there. My time ayle hi bereisha, v'hoda ayle ma. Why did you let your wife go in first, and afterwards you went in, and afterwards v'hoda aylinu ranon, and afterwards we came in? Answers the Gemara the following. Amalahu mishum deloi bot kisali. I haven't been boydek you Rabbanon, and I don't know who you are. And if I would have gone in first, I would have left you behind with my wife outside. And I don't know, I haven't been boydek you. Says Rashi, over there in Chav Gimel Amud Beis, deloi bot kisali, im ksherim im pritzim. The Omama, says Rashi in Gemseches Derech Eretz, kol odom yeh benecho kelistim. And therefore these Rabbanon who came with, he didn't want them to stay outside even for a moment with his wife. And the obvious question, maybe not so obvious, but the question which one can ask, and the Sefer Charedim asks this explicitly. He brings this Meseches Derech Eretz, kol odom yeh benecho kelistim, v'teimah, Sharei Omru ve'donis kol odom lekaf schus, u'mashma sheyeh tzadik be'eino, ve'lo yechashdenu klal. How did that fit in with being done lekaf schus everyone? Culture came Rabbanon. So why wasn't he done lekaf schus then? How does that fit in with kol odom yeh benecho kelistim? ויש שלמה, די noch הנמה. I'll read out the Lashon of Seder Chirim, די noch הנמה. שצורך שיהיה צדיק גומו בעיניו, לכבדוי בלב שולם ולא לחינף. You have to be done lekav chodom, every person, you have to be done lekav schus to be mechabet him, not chanifa, is taka a gute mensch. Is taka a ehrliche mensch. And to be mechabet him and mekarev, every person, have done is kolot lekav schus as we know. Mikol mokom, le'inlen hishoma mimenu, yechashvenu l'rosha. To protect yourself till you've been mevara, that the person is a person who you can rely on, yechashvenu l'rosha. Elim ken yeboduk loy ukahida ab khilkia shechoshat chachma Yisrael shebo etzloy velo yniach ishte yemo mishum de bodak lehu. We're not here chas v'sholom to make anybody nervous, to make everybody get afraid. You have to be choished everybody, you have to don lekav schus everybody. But hand in hand with being the don lekav schus every person, you have to protect yourself, and yourself means yourself, your wife and your children. And that's what we're here for tonight for. To have an awareness, to teach us not how to get nervous, only how to build confidence into our children, and how to know how to protect them, to be aware, and Be'ezer Hashem, like that, we will see the emes true nachas altaras HaKodesh the way we want to. And now it's a cover to hear Rabbi Shimon, Be'ezer Hashem, present this issue, al derech, which Gedolei Yisrael have given his haskoma here and in America and in Eretz Yisrael, that this is the way one has to speak in order that we should be very clear. We should come out, Be'ezer Hashem, clear, this is the way our house and our children will be protected.
Mishus Arbonim, Chayda Sibba, Merev Rabbeisai. I've spoken many times throughout the world, nationally and internationally, and I must tell you this is the hardest of all possible drashas, presentations to talk about. It's a very difficult subject, and it will demand, in order to be accurate and precise, that we should have clarity, the usage of certain language that under normal circumstances we would not use. Indeed, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim speaks clearly in the third parak. Why is it that Lashon HaKodesh is called Lashon HaKodesh? And the Rambam suggests, because there is no language for private parts of a person, not a man or a woman, in Lashon HaKodesh. And he tells us that if we have to talk about it, K'shiava hatzarech lezachem, yaselu tachbulus b'kinoyim b'milas hacheres kasher nista ma'asoisom be'eis hatzarech b'chol yecholtein. Rabbi say, I will do my best. Aber das is eis hatzarech. There is a time when we have to be mature, we have to be open, we have to be clear. We are protecting children's lives. It is literally hatzalas nefashos. The Gemara in Pesachim clears the shaila about Lashon Maguna, what Lashonis we can use and can't use, and brings a raya kiyadua from Noach by the Teva, that it says when he brought the behemoths into the Teva, he brought behemoths Tahiras and behemoths she'einen Tahiras. Didn't say Lashon Tomei, didn't say Lashon behemoths Tameas, which is a Kotzel Lashon. And in the back by the Rif, go take a look, you'll see the Bala Ma'or brings in the Ma'ora Cotton a Dava Nifla and a Dava Choshev to this Maimed. And Zog the Bala Ma'or, this is his Lashon. The question again is why the Torah doesn't say Tameh, Lashon Kotzer. It says Lashon Behem Shein Tahiras, and yet elsewhere in the Torah we find in Shmini, for example, it says Tameh. By Shratzim, by Meichalas Asuras, Tamiu. Zog the Balamor. V'Tami de Kosa Bereisa, Einu Lashon Maguna, Lefish Sorich HaKosav Loima. Lahazhir es Yisrael ulafrisha mikol tuma. Lahazhir es Yisrael ulafrisha mikol tuma. Rabbi say, this is what we're doing tonight. If I use language that anyone finds offensive, if I speak an Inyan out that someone found offensive, do me a taiva. rather than walk out and grumble, please tell me. Contact me, contact the organizers. Tell us how it could have been said better. But understand that this is la frisha min atuma, this is the eis hatzorich, and you'll forgive me if I offend. There are many ideas as we walk through. I've given you a handout, and I want to walk you through the handout so that we understand Kiburian clearly all the inyanim. And some of the inyanim will be repeated again here and there. I'd rather be safe than sorry. Let's see if we can define what are we going to be discussing tonight. What's the sugya? What's the subject of sexual abuse? Child sexual abuse. There's 3 comments I've made here I'd like to examine and explain. Child sexual abuse generally refers to a form of child abuse in which a child is abused primarily for the sexual gratification of an adult or older adolescent. People ask me, kaseda u kaseda, what happens with little children, 3-year-olds, who play together and one exposes their private parts to the other one and they giggle and they run away? Is that child abuse? Are you saying that's abusive? No, I'm not saying that's abusive. But what I am saying is when one of the people involved has a need, a sexual need, is pleasuring themselves somehow, enacting a sexual behavior somehow, playing with another child, then that's not play, Rabbi say. And the results of that can lead to sexual abuse, and we will discuss this shortly, what that exactly means. Child sexual abuse can occur through both direct and indirect sexual contact between the abuser and the victim. Talking, an older person, an older teenager or adult, talking suggestively in a way where the younger person, the child, the boy or the girl, is aware that the innuendo is of a sexual fashion, where they're interested in them in such a fashion, where they're looking at them in such a fashion, where it clearly indicates they have some sort of sexual interest in them, can create all the features and trauma of sexual abuse. It can happen without touching. Traditionally, we were always done on the shaila of, so who touched whom and where and what? Was it outside the clothing, inside the clothing? It can even happen, Rabbi say, without touching. It can happen by implication. It can happen by innuendo. Child sexual abuse can even occur through the child being accidentally exposed to sexually explicit material. I've seen children who have ended up with the full trauma of sexual abuse. Innocent children simply walking down the street and discovering an inappropriate magazine of pornography, picking it up, putting it in their bag, and reading that magazine later on, and ended up with the full gamut of symptoms that are typical in child trauma of sexual abuse. We have to expand our awareness. We tend to think, unfortunately, of sexual abuse as some horrendous act like rape or something with a knife point, and so therefore our minds are not collect. We're not looking for or understanding how this occurs, to whom this occurs, where this occurs. And that's why our children are not so protected. Even simple exposure to inappropriate material can cause the trauma reaction of sexual abuse that we will explain shortly what exactly that is, how it destroys a child's life. I've given a list here of types of sexual abuse so that we can understand, again, Rav Chedemilsa, what are we talking about here? This occurs when an adult or any other person who possesses or whom the victim perceives as possessing a power or control over them does any of the following. These people who have this power could be anyone. It could be a parent, a rebbe, a teacher, an adult, any young uncle. It could be another child. even a child of a similar age who themselves, unfortunately, have already been traumatized, that child's interest in the other child is of a sexual nature, causes sexual abuse. So when we're thinking, we have to abandon from our minds the notion of some dirty old man who's abusing our kids, lurking in the park. It is in our homes, it is in our shuls, it's in our Bati Midrashim. It's happening to us in our lives. So I ask and appeal, expand your awareness as we move through this evening, and try to embrace, if you can, because what we're doing tonight is Hatzalas Nefashos. It's Pashat, simply Hatzalas Nefashos. The types of sexual abuse. Any physical sexual interaction with a child. That means if a child experiences someone else being interested in their private parts for the gratification of the other person, then sexual abuse has occurred. Any sexual kissing, fondling, exposure of either of their genitalia, exposing a child to pornography, just seeing a magazine, seeing a picture inappropriately, being shown a picture, kal v'chayma. Saying sexually suggestive statements towards a child. The use of a position of trust to compel otherwise unwanted sexual activity without physical force. Implying, talking, explaining. I've heard awful stories in the course of my career of the implication of someone in a position of power or control who, giving a kiss, giving a touch inappropriately, a hug inappropriately, where the younger child is fully aware this is of a sexual nature. Any sexual actions or acts between siblings. Now, we're not talking about non-sexual, normal affection of older siblings to younger ones. For this, Rabbi say everyone has to use your judgment. You cannot say that an older sibling is playing with a younger 3-year-old sibling and gives them a hug and a kiss. This is as normal can be. But you have to use common sense. You have to be aware, and if you're aware that such a thing can occur where an older child who perhaps is already developing towards puberty, or an older child is doing something that seems to you odd, it seems of a sexual fashion, it seems too focused, it seems too intense, kids lying on each other and touching each other in ways that everyone looking at it realizes right away there's something odd about this, then unfortunately there probably is something odd about it, and seek counsel. We have to realize that it's very common that a child becomes abused and then experiments with their own younger siblings in the home. And people want to say, oh, it's playful. No, it's not playful. And if something bothers you, it's probably because something's going on that's wrong. Seek advice. All these things are aspects of sexual abuse. In C, I've written, the focus of sexual abuse is most often on the damage to sexual development of the child and not necessarily on what exactly happened. Countless times when a shaila of sexual abuse comes up, there's a long dian about what happened. Did they touch outside the clothing? Did they touch inside the clothing? They put the hand in the pocket, they put the hand down the shirt. There's a whole dian about exactly what was the maisa, what was the action that happened. And that's a fantasy. Let it go. The focus of sexual abuse with our children, unfortunately, is when someone is exploited primarily for the benefit of another person. They're taking advantage of someone sexually for the benefit of the other person. They're clearly engaging in something that is important to them sexually. And the damage is not on the maisa. The damage is on the fact that this child, unfortunately, has been brought into the world of sexuality where they simply don't belong and where they can't possibly ever have any possible outlet that will not destroy their neshama, make them feel embarrassed, ashamed, or shut down, or ruin their life. In normal childhood development, in our machne, children have private parts. So how do we relate to it? So we relate to it through the window, through the prism, through the concepts of sneas and kedusha, where children are led and taught and understand there's inyoni kedusha, there's inyoni sneas. And so we have to be tzanua, and we're taught in that concept. But ideally, halavai and halavai, and in the course of my career, maybe once or twice I've met such a child who was zoiche to come to the chuppah without any relationship to their private parts in the terminology or the context of sexuality. They related to their private parts in the context of sneas, in the context of kedusha. The damage of sexual abuse is we must let go of the idea of trying to done this maisa or that maisa, this action, this, he did this or he did that. That's not the issue here. The issue here was unfortunately a child taken into the world of sexuality where they relate to their own private parts now in a sexual fashion rather than relating to their private parts in a tznius fashion. Because once a child, unfortunately, the pathways towards sexuality have been opened up in a child, Rahmana litzlan, there is no possible outlet for that child that will not make him feel ashamed, embarrassed, or like a Rasha Marusha. For many of the children who are nichnas, unfortunately, are taking into this world of sexuality prematurely and realize they relate to themselves sexually. Imagine the kind of life they live, the kind of tsar and suffering they have going through life, going through our yeshiva systems, and our Beis Yaakovs, fully aware and listening to frequently wonderful and well-meaning and completely appropriate drashas about Shmiras Einayim, about Shmiras Haguf, where good Rebbeim, well-meaning teachers, pepper and drop into their drashas and their shiurim whenever there's an opportunity to be mechazik in Yonei Tznius, and they exploit the opportunity to be mechazik our children. And Rahman Islan, in that same class, when a well-meaning Rebbe, and they should, and this is right, and they're mechazik the kids in Kedushas Yisrael, and they're mafred between us and between Ummas Ha'olam that we have in Yoni Kedusha. And imagine what a child feels like sitting in that class, listening to those drashas year after year, who Rahmana Litzlan has already been opened up to the sugya of seeing themselves, their own private parts, viewing themselves as being part of the sexual community, the world of sexuality, where they've been exploited sexually, and now they see themselves as a sexual person. What do you think it feels like sitting in classroom after classroom, year after year, yeshiva after yeshiva, and listening to this, appropriately listening to this? The devastation to our children, the unique devastation to our children, because of the strong hashkafas hatayah, the values we have about Kedusha. You have to magnify in your mind what it feels like, the lebedika gehinnom of what a child feels like, who unfortunately was already, his pathways or her pathways to sexuality were opened up by being played with sexually. And now they got to survive somehow. How are they going to get through? What are they going to do? How are they going to live? The issue, Rabbi Isai, is not, the dion is not about did he touch here or did he touch there, was it over the clothing or under the clothing. These are not, they're chelik, but this is nicht the dion. The dion was this child unfortunately exposed to experiencing themselves, their private parts, as sexual, instead of belonging to the world of sneas. The damage, the trauma that happens to these poor children once they view themselves as a sexual being is absolutely staggering. It's staggering. If we can just think that the gateways to sexuality are opened up in little children who now view themselves as sexual people without any possibility of feeling connected anymore and to our community, to our Torah, unless they shut it down completely. And the devastation that has later on their lives is absolutely staggering. I assure you, and for those in this room who have suffered with this abuse, there are those of us that understand you and understand the pain and the suffering you live with every day because of what happened to you. We have such a chayv kaddish to work on these inyanim to protect our children. I want to mention a couple of statistics, but before I do, I want to talk about the subject of statistics. This whole subject, this whole noiseh, is incredibly hard for all of us to be makabel. Anyone sitting here has to have I have a hard time talking about it. Kal v'chayma, if you don't work in this world, if you're not involved in treating and understanding this sugya, how difficult it is to embrace the truth. But if we don't embrace the truth, so what are we doing? I gerade spoke to Rav Asher Weiss Shlita before I came. I told him that I understand fully that when we start mentioning statistics, people get unwound. You know, no, it can't be. He's exaggerating. I've heard, from other people, it's nishta zoi. It's not in England like that. I'll tell you, anywhere I've been in the world, wherever I was, they say, yeah, that's not here. That's over there. Wherever he came from, probably the statistics are there, but not by us. That's our defense mechanism, Rabbi say. It's part of the defense mechanism. We're trying to protect ourselves. We can't deal with it. I'm telling you, I have a hard time dealing with it. After so many years of working with it, and I still have a hard time dealing with it. I'm asking if you could just be open-minded a little bit. If you could free yourself just a little bit. That we're not talking sensationalism, we're talking, unfortunately, reality. And it's a reality that's hard to bear. But if we don't say the truth, if we don't put the facts down, well, then we're misleading you. Then we're pashut misleading you, and that's not fair. Many years ago, as a therapist, I began in Lakewood. Over the years now I live in Eretz Yisrael. But we began looking at the off-the-derech world, the kids going off the derech, and began working with that sugya, as unfortunately it hit our communities. And as far as I know, there is no Torah community in the world that doesn't, unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, have an off-the-derech sugya. What we didn't know early on was the impact of sexual abuse on that sugya. The relationship between off-the-derech and sexual abuse, that we didn't know. In the early years, when I realized what was happening, because it was a major chelik of my work, my professional work, I consulted with Gedolim, should we talk about it? And at that time the feeling was better not. The Olam wasn't ready to hear. Ruach Chachamim has changed. And the feeling is that the information has to be shared, even though it's incredibly hard to understand. So I'll share one statistic with you. Lite musagim, to try and bring my passion and the passion and pain of the children I work with to you so we can protect our children. I say it not for sensationalism, Rabbi say, please understand. I say it with pain for the hurt children. And it's a misquoted statistic, but let me share it and then let's discuss it. If you look at the off the derech sugya, what's the cause? What causes kids to go off? Amol, since the binyan bayis, the destruction of the bayis, so pogroms and poverty were some of the great reasons people went off the derech. In our world, I don't see kids going off because of pogroms or poverty. But I can tell you the research, those of us that have done it, and I did extensive research on this, and since I did it, other formal agencies have been out there doing similar research and reported almost identical statistics to me that appears to suggest that the off the derech sugya alone is accounted for 80%, 80 of the off the derech sugya was fueled by sexual abuse. And it's pashut, Rabbi say, if you understand why. It's so pashut. Because how on earth does a child survive in our kehillas, in our moistus haTorah, that are trying so strong to be mechanich our children on Taras HaKodesh, where all our moistus, we try so hard to help be mechazik the children on these inyanim. What does it feel like to listen to that day after day after day when you unfortunately were an abuse victim and actually you feel as if you are that very person that they're claiming in the Moistus, then we're stating that's not for us, that's not Kedushas Yisrael, that's for the Goyim, that's nicht for uns. And to hear that rhetoric again and again and again, knowing full well that I enjoy it, but I enjoy being sexual. And I have pleasure from it, even though I'm guilty from it, and I feel embarrassed about it, but I enjoy it. And to listen to that rhetoric over and over and over again. 80%. I was the first one, I believe, who said it, but I am confident other organizations and agencies have come to the same conclusion. That when you see off the derech, you're looking at trauma victims. And most of it, and even if it's not 80, who cares? The vast majority of the off the derech sugya is caused by this. It's incredibly difficult to stay within our machne, to stay for, even though kids desperately want it. They desperately want it, Rabbi say. But it's very hard to stay in our machne where this has happened to you, where pathways to sexuality were opened up against your will when you were a child, and now you find yourself enjoying the pleasures of sexuality and craving it because you can't turn it off. Once it's on, it can't be turned off. There's no therapeutic treatment that can just cleverly turn it off. The kids come to me and they cry in my office and they cry and cry. Can you not take it from me? Can you give me back the kedusha I had? And the answer is no. No, you can't. You absolutely can't. This is an nisayon you're going to have to work out how to deal with. Litem musagim. A boy, unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, is molested pre-puberty by an older boy. An older boy plays around with, probably he himself was molested when he was a little boy, and he plays around with the little boy. People ask me, what's so damaging? Let him forget about it. Tell him it was wrong, it was naughty, he shouldn't have done it. Let him forget about it. How is that sexual abuse, people ask me? What's so abusive? Someone touched him once. Okay, he'll get over it. Normal sexual development in a boy precedes at puberty, at which point a regular, normal, healthy young man will develop taivas noshim, and hainuhach, at the same time, a normal, healthy boy will develop a nauseous reaction, which is given to him by the Rabbeinu Shalom for taivas anoshim. Otherwise, how's he going to live? How's he going to go through life? So hainuhach, when a boy goes through puberty, a regular, healthy boy, he develops a strong taivas noshim, and an equally strong disgust, a nauseous reaction to taivas anoshim. That's a healthy person. That's the way the Eibishter made it. It's the way it's meant to be. If not, how would they sit in a classroom? How would they be in school? What appears to happen, unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, again, litem musagim, Rabbi say, we should have compassion and understanding, and we should understand the noisa, why this is so chashuv. Any of the things we've talked about before, in the list of what is sexual abuse, any of these things happening by an older boy to a younger boy, any of these things can, I'm not saying will, but can limit, diminish, or eradicate from that boy developing the nauseous reaction to taivas anoshim when he hits puberty. Thus meant, he hits puberty, develops a regular, strong taivas noshim, and tragically discovers that because the person who molested him was a boy when he was younger and took him into the world of sexuality through male touch, he can have diminished or no resistance to male sexuality. That means he experiences taivas anoshim, not just taivas noshim. Rahman al-Islam. That's the abuse, Rabbi Say. We're done on the maisa that happened as if we're looking at that was that abusive, and we miss what really happens, which is a fundamental potential shinoi in the ganze mahus of the person's relationship towards sexuality. This poor boy, I can't imagine a worse abuse than that, than to take a poor, nice little kid, a boy, and take from him the potential to develop a mania, a disgust, a nauseous reaction to male sexuality. Put yourself in his shoes. Just imagine, put yourself in his shoes. What a nightmare, what a Gehinnom this boy's life turns into when he hits puberty. Because this boy's still in yeshiva. This boy's not acted out. This boy, unfortunately, has wiring in his brain connected to his self-esteem, that's wiring that's also connected towards sexuality. And that wiring is also connected to male sexuality. And unlike the rest of us, who are not molested ever, who if a man would come and try to engage me sexually, I know I would have, and I've experienced it, a total nauseous, revolting, gut-wrenching, painful, ughy feeling inside, which is what a healthy male should have. That's what the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us. These kids don't have any of that. They actually get aroused. Opportunistically, they will find, not that they're looking for it, they will experience certain boys and men, each one is different, why and what, not everyone, just the same way that all men don't experience arousal from all nashim. However, opportunistically, the abuse, Rabbi say, is that these poor little boys will now experience arousal to male sexuality. And they're in yeshiva. And they're in a classroom. And they go on to yeshiva. I get boy after boy sent to me, I'm Eretz Yisrael now, who come in zerbrochen, broken, crushed to the core. They're facing shidduchim. And they come to me full of busha and chlima, not knowing how to even say the words. And I know exactly what they're going to say because I see the look on their face. And they sit in silence of pain and embarrassment and fear as they share with me that they don't have taivas noshim. How am I going to get married? And I have strong taivas anoshim and it's killing me. And it goes back to sexual abuse that happened when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. When someone played around with them. I'm trying to bring litem musagim. I'm not going to give you the whole sugya of every part and parcel of this sugya. It's not shayach. That's a course. That's a year of study. But litem musogim rabbosai, to understand how serious this noise is. And again, it's not about the maisa. It's about the impact on normative sexual development. That these poor children are wrecked, and they know it. And I know for a fact that in this room are sitting people who went through this and are suffering to this day. In fact, every time I speak, afterwards I'm contacted by such people who tell me the first time in their life they felt validated. That someone understood the unbelievable Gehinnom of their life, of every day of their life, to have to deal with this. Sexual abuse is about the impact on sexual development. Avada, if the abuse itself is coupled with a traumatic event, like, God forbid, like a knife point, a rape at knife point with a gun, then there's a double trauma. But we're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about kids playing around and touching each other, opening up the pathways of these children to no longer see themselves in the world of sneers and shmir senayim in our machne, but to see themselves as fully open to and involved in the world of sexuality without any possibility to deal with that other than shame and busha and the potential eventual repetition as they hit puberty. And they need to exploit and do more, so they touch more kids. We years ago spoke, the bottom of the first page, the issue of false resilience. I speak to Rabbanim around the world on this subject, and I ask them, like, what's most of what you do most days? A rav of a kehillah, in your counseling work with your families. And I have no suffix whatsoever that most of what most Rabbanim deal with most days goes back to sexual abuse. The damages to families, the quick marriages and broken engagements. We all know this is a plague that's happening in left, right, and center, that most of that goes back to sexual abuse. One of the ways that some of these young people try desperately to deal with this is by being resilient. In the old days, in the days when I was taught this sugya, many, many years ago, we talked about resilience and why some children are resilient and others aren't. And I spoke this way for many, many years. I abandoned it. I don't do it anymore. I've been criticized many times by people who sat in audiences when I spoke almost glibly about resilience and how what percentage are resilient, and somehow they manage, it's water off a duck's back because they stayed frum, they didn't go off the derech. And then people came to speak to me and wrote me scathing emails saying, you're wrong, you're dead wrong. I was one of those, they tell me. I was one of those. And to this day, I'm married 25, 30 years, and I suffer every day. I suffer in my marital relationship every day. I have to force myself and push myself. I have desires that are inappropriate and wrong, and I can't live with myself. How many of these poor children, when they finally find a way to get through, what do? They block it out. They shut it down. They shut the sugya down. They become as if it didn't happen. And then they have to get married. I'm frequently, happened to me just last week, I get calls from Kala teachers, from Chassan teachers, who tell me they were giving classes, preparing a finer Chassan and a finer Kala for their Chasna, and they realized, something's off here. The reaction of the Chasna or Kala is off. Something's off. And I've worked with many, many Chassan, Madrichim, and Kala teachers over the years to help them ask the questions in the way they get the answers. One of the classic things I hear all the time when I quote the statistics, for example, is that people tell me, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. I've asked countless people who look like they're abused, were you ever abused? They said no. Most of them say no. I got news for you. Almost everyone says no the first time. Unless you know how to come back and ask the second question, unless you know how to ask it again in a different way, in a respectful and sensitive way, unless you know how to say to them, would you mind if I describe to you abuse? Perhaps you don't know what it is. Perhaps we're talking, it's a language issue here. Do you mind if I describe it to you? I do this weekly with someone almost every week who denies vehemently I was ever sexually abused. No one molested me. Why does everyone ask me? They're very upset about it. And then as I talk them through it, they get the shocked look on their face as it turns out, of course they were sexually abused for years and years and years, and they either shut it down, they block the memories, or they're not misyaches to it as sexual abuse. No, we were falling around, touching, well, that wasn't sexual abuse, because they don't have a musig what it is. And once I explain to them what it is, I watch them faint in front of me when they realize what's happened to their lives. And so how many Rabbanim deal with this? Where most of what they're doing with people, families, and marriages goes back to this. And I can imagine you're thinking, the guy sounds crazy. Most of what's being discussed goes back to this? Oh, but yeah. These are the realities we're dealing with. The damages to families, to children, and even if you don't agree with my statistics and you find it hard to believe, but the kamas of it and the destruction of it, that no one's going to disagree with. That we all know is true. This is why Gedolei Yisrael have decided that we must speak about these inyanim at these kind of kinusim. It's just crucial because without education and knowledge of what it is and what you should be doing, how will you protect your children? Rabbi Rezhin had mentioned before in the beginning the taina and complaint. I hear it constantly from families I work with. Snias dika, Taira dika, Kedusha dika families trying to bring up their children b'taras hakodesh, who were never educated or told what to look for or what the subject was. They have no clue. What is the noisa? What are we talking about? So how do you protect your children if you don't know? We have in our minds this musig of this dirty old man in the dirty raincoat. Whether he's dirty, the raincoat's dirty, or they're both dirty, I'm not really sure. Oh, but this is the musig we have in our minds, and we have no clue. This is our children touching other children. This is teenagers touching small children. This is in our machne. We're not looking. The adult pedophile issue is not the noisa tonight. It's a heinous crime. It's not what we're talking about. The subject to Masir, we're not talking about it. This is an inyan for Rabbanim. We're talking about the sexual abuse that occurs between older children and younger children that affects homes and every type of home. People say to me, no, it's only this type of home. I don't want to say the words. I'm embarrassed to say it. It's lashon hara to say it. But everyone wants to say, nein, nicht in unser Stub, in that type of home, or this type of home. They come up with names and titles. Again, I'm embarrassed. I would never even dread to say the words. It's every type of home, Rabbi say. It's every type, whether it's Rabbanim and Mechanchim and Balabatim, regular people, working people, it makes no difference. This cuts across everything. You can never reassure yourself, not in my shtub. In my shtub, it's not happening. We have to be choshed, but not panic. It's like Rabbi Rezhin said. We're not asking for widespread panic. What we're trying to do is give you information. Zehu. Take the information and use it wisely. Don't panic. Seek consultations if you have a suffix. But don't panic. We're not after panic. We're after saving kids' lives. Number 3. What should a parent be aware of do or not do. I want to mention one thing I didn't write. Oh, you know what? Let me mention it later on. General considerations. Most abusers are not what we picture in our minds as the repulsive, dirty man sitting on a park bench. In fact, most abusers are youths themselves. We have to come to terms with letting go of old-fashioned notions of pedophiles, of old, the dirty old man sugya in our head. Because Rov Rubam, if I would tell you beyond Rov Rubam, I would suggest to you that 90% plus of all stories about sexual abuse in our kehillas, and I'm talking about the Torah Dika world, is not the pedophiles. 90% of it, the damage is done from older children to younger children. So please change your mindset. If you had the mindset, let it go. Every parent has to be responsible and look at our children. Now, you want to know why is it happening today more? It's a good question. Not for now. It's a good question. Oh, but it is. Is it more? Is it just moniskala? I don't know. Let's not sidetrack ourselves with these lomdish shaylas. It's a fact that it's happening in our homes and our shuls and our schools and our streets. This is a fact. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't. But get out of your head the idea that this is to do with adult male pedophiles. That is a heinous sugya. It's not the sugya of tonight, Rabbi Say. That's not this sugya. This sugya is about older children to younger children. Let's walk it through together. First time sexual abuse tends to occur. Now, it's not exclusive of others. I'm just giving you, again, this is litem musogim. This is not an intensive course that's going to cover Allah's possibilities of every type of, that's not shaykh, but litem musogim, that we should all wake up and understand. First time sexual abuse tends to occur to boys as soon as they leave the home, as soon as they go into any place of formal education, kindergarten, as soon as they're in a place where there are older boys in the school with them, that's when first-time sexual abuse of little boys occurs. For this reason, I begged and pleaded with schools worldwide to keep these little kids separate, give them proper shmira, to have cameras everywhere, to keep an eye on these little kids, because little kids are the very easy prey because they have private parts. They have an aver. So they're very easy prey to older kids. Little kids always crave the respect, the covet. For a little kid, it's a covet to have an older kid interested in him, playing with him, talking to him. Even a grade or two difference is a cheshivas for a little kid. And so unfortunately, those older children who were already exploited, a large percentage of them will simply repeat the behavior that happened to them by playing with the private parts of little kids. And it happens like nothing. It happens like in 30 seconds it can happen. It can happen in a bathroom stall in 30 seconds, where an older kid shoves a little kid into a bathroom stall while no one's looking and pulls his pants down and plays with his private parts, or pulls his own pants down and gets the little kid to play with his private parts. And for that child, the older one, that was visual, tactile pornography. It was stimulus. It was material that he will use to pleasure himself later on. He'll kick that kid out. He wasn't looking to abuse him. As a matter of fact, the older kid has absolutely no musig klal v'klal in this world. You'll put him on a polygraph test and you'll ask him. He has no musig what he did was abusive. Can't relate to the word. He was looking for pleasure material. He was looking for stimulus. He was looking for pornography. And so he touches this young kid's private parts. And the young kid now knows that I'm chashuv. One of the reasons I'm chashuv is because I have private parts. He's created a relationship between self-esteem, chashivas, and private parts. And so the journey of the younger kid continues now, affected, unfortunately, by the connection between his own self-esteem and his private parts. He's chashuv because he has private parts. And so his journey continues. Little boys get affected in shuls. I've had countless times I begged parents, why do you bring your children if you're not going to keep them next to you? Shul is not a place to babysit kids. It may be convenient and your wife needs to sleep in. I have no idea. Everyone has their own story. But you don't babysit children in shul unless the child sits next to you every single second. And if he needs to go to the bathroom, you escort him there and then you bring him back. Because shuls are notorious for parents bringing their kids to shul and they dray and they play. And they say, they bring them back, come back, come and go, and they're in and out. And it happens like nothing in the bathrooms and in the cloakrooms. Remember, if you can reframe in your mind that sexual abuse occurs when a younger child is now aware, I have chashivas because I have private parts. Someone else needs my private parts, or someone needs me to touch his private parts, makes me chashuv. That's sexual abuse because of the impact upon sexual development. And it happens like nothing. So no, you don't take your children to a shul and let them dray. If you bring him to shul, he davens. And if he's not ready to daven, you don't bring him. Girls typically are abused first time between the age of 9 and 12, typically. None of this is exclusive. It could happen earlier. Please. I'm just giving you the classic. But please don't say no. Russell said no girls get abused younger than 9. I never said it. I'm giving litim musagim. Girls typically get abused between the age of 9 and 12 the first time. And typically by an older brother between 14 and 18. That is the umfang for most girls of their sexual abuse. People have a hard time relating that this happens between a brother and a sister. Oh, but it does. And tragically, in countless of these stories, by the time the girl gets older, 3-4 years later, gets older and hits puberty, and her life falls apart because she sees herself as a sexual being. And so there's only one of two ways to deal with it. You shut yourself down or you act out. You either act out, not because you're a prutza, chas v'shalom. It's disgusting. She acts out like a prutza because she's trying to survive. She's trying to deal with and live with the fact that someone sexualized her. And she can't live with it. So one option is to shut it down, which many of them do. And then they get married with this false resilience and they can't deal with intimacy and the marriage explodes. The others act out sexually when they hit puberty. And so now this 9, 10-year-old girl hits 13, 14, 15 and acts out sexually while her brother who abused her has somehow, by some miracle, put his life together somehow. He's off learning in Eretz Yisrael somehow. He may have got married somehow. And her life is a Gehinnom, a nightmare of torture. She's been sexualized and he's the big tzaddik of the family now. He's the hero. He put his life together. He went through his struggles. Boys will be boys. Oh, but he went back and someone was makarev him and now he's learning shtak. And she's dealing with the fact that she goes to school every day and she's the prutza. Because the only way she can deal with what happened to her, the only possible way she deals with it is by actually enjoying it. So she acts out sexually. And she's condemned, blamed, criticized. She's the one that's thrown out of school, thrown out of the communities. She's the one who's looked at as she's the Rishanta. And all she's doing is reacting to what happened to her. That's the typical umfang is in homes. The girl's sexual abuse typically happens first time at home. And it's almost always an older brother. could be a young uncle, could be other people, lots of stories. But the typical, most common, classic story is an older brother with a younger sister. And Rabbi Say, I'm talking about children who do full sexual acts together. We're not talking simply just about touching each other. But that alone could cause the impact of trauma. The fact a girl knows her brother needs her this way creates all the trauma and can send her off the derech and into a crisis of pekuach nefesh. And it is pekuach nefesh. This is not a foolish statistic. It is real pekuach nefesh. Kids who typically abuse victims who will turn to drugs, not because they thought drugs were clever, not because they did some research and decided drugs, that's cool. Let me be like a guy and do drugs. Let me do drugs. That wasn't why they did drugs. They turn to drugs by accident. They fall into the sugya of drugs by accident. Someone gives them something and they're hurting, gefährlich. We can't imagine, those of us not abused, what it feels like to be an abused child in our kelas. And so one day, opportunistically, by accident, someone gives them a drug. They give them a pill, simple pill, they find it, they take it, and guess what? They feel better. They don't feel so much hurt and pain and fear. They can breathe better. And so starts their journey into drugs. No one chooses drugs because they think it's smart. Therefore, from age 9, no boy should sleep in a room with a sister. It's absolutely unkind and unfair to put a 9-year-old plus boy asleep in a room with a sister. Once a boy could possibly be reaching towards puberty, once he could be having his first hihurim, and I'm being machmir here, because I've seen 9-year-olds who've reached puberty today. I've seen 9-year-olds with bagrus where they've already developed. So 9. This poor kid, how many kids told me of the torture it was for them, sleeping in a room with a little sister, talking about a little sister. When they hit puberty, and they knew in that bed in the middle of the night, they got up to the bathroom, and they started getting a kishri, and there's that little girl asleep. And it would be so interesting to look what it looks like if I could pull down her underpants and take a look. And kachava, so starts the journey, nebuch, of sexual abuse, another cycle. And this poor boy wasn't abused. He was simply a boy reaching bagrus, placed into a room unwittingly, together with a younger sister. Boys of 9 years old and up do not belong sleeping for any reason ever in a room with a younger sister. And then people say to me, what happens if there's 2 sisters in the room? Well, then you got double the problem. It's Meshuggah Rabbi, you got to realize this poor little boy is in that room at 4 a.m. when he wakes up with a little bit of a kishri from a chaloim he had. And he sees one of his sisters with the covers off and the light from the street light on her body. What did we do to him? What nisayon do we place him in? How can we do it? No boy over 9 sleeps in a room with a sister, period, finished. If that presents a problem in your house, work it out. But don't cut corners, Rabbi say. It doesn't happen anymore. A father should never sleep in bed with a child. I've had numbers of the most painful, pitiful, tragic stories of sexual abuse that as I dealt with older children, and we reviewed and went backwards, they couldn't recall, they were never molested, nothing ever happened to them, the regular kinderlich. And they couldn't understand how did they become sexualized. I always felt this way, they said. And if I'm persistent, and keep working and trying and seeing what we can evoke and what we could bring up. And slowly but surely I found a pattern. And it's such a painful, and such a chmanis, which is why I'm saying it now, because there's no intent to do anything wrong. Adarabah. There's a father who hears his babies, his children wake up early in the morning and it's way before time to get up. And he figures, they're crying, I'll take them into bed with me, I'll comfort my child. Which is okay, I have no problem with that. Unless there's a sveka, he's going to fall asleep. If you have a sveka, you might fall asleep. You do not take a child into bed with you. Let the mother take the child into bed, not a man. And as painful as it is for me to share it, I share it, and it's not comfortable. But I heard the stories too many times of a father who woke up, having done this, to discover his child playing with his exposed aver, as he was having a chaloim, because he fell asleep with a child who somehow the contact must have touched somehow his aver that became bakishri, to find a child playing with his aver. A child, totally a little baby, has no clue what they're doing. And we've discovered that this kind of thing causes sexual abuse. Fathers, do not take children into bed with them if you have a sveka of falling asleep. If you're awake, you're up, you're schmoozing, and it's comfort and it's cute, by all means. But not if you have a sofik, the slightest possible sofik, you might fall asleep. Don't do it. 2 children of any gender should not be in a room with the door locked without the parents understanding in advance why. I got countless stories, tragic stories, and they were like pitiful in a sense. Started off with girls. Shabbos afternoon, daughter has a friend who's going to come over, and they're going to study nach. They're going to prepare their homework. They're going to study. The parents go to sleep, and the 2 girls go into a room, and they lock the door. Why do they lock the door? They lock the door officially because we don't want to be disturbed by the little kids. We're studying, and they're disturbing us. And 2 hours later, they come out of the room, having studied for 2 hours. They've told it to me countless times, girls, how that was their time to experiment sexually. One of them had been abused. One had been abused, terrified to have access to boys, because that would be seen and that would be chapped. She experiments with a friend. And Pasha Kal V'Chaima, a girl and a boy in a room locked. And even 2 boys in a room locked. A locked door in a bedroom or any room with 2 kids together, without the parents knowing in advance why. And you need to tell your kids this. I don't ever want to find you locked in a room with another child ever without clearing it with me first. And there may be a reason why. Kid could be changing. 2 kids share a bedroom and they're changing at night and they like to lock the door because the kids come in and it's a 30-second maisa, a minute maisa while they lock the door. Makes perfect sense. Lock the door. You don't want the kids, coming in while they're changing for bed. I'm saying use common sense. But 2 children of any gender, 2 boys, 2 girls, a boy and a girl, in a room together without any explanation of why, locked in a room for a period of time, something is happening in that room. And you have to be mechanech kids. This is not acceptable. Ever. Ever. Girls experiment. If you have daughters, you have to realize, just like boys experiment, girls experiment. In our kehillas, when kids have been sexually abused, so the lines have been crossed, the pathways to sexuality have been opened up. And these kids, they have nowhere to go with it other than play with other kids. Teach your children that if someone comes to them and someone tries to touch them or engage them sexually, you have to have a conversation with your children. It sounds something like this. You sit with your children and you say to them, listen, And I want to tell you, I've heard this from Gedolei Yisrael, it's mutter l'shanos a little bit. We can say a little white lie here. I don't like the idea of a father sitting down with their kid as if the father's choshed their child, angrily choshed their child. This is a very dangerous and damaging thing to do to the yachas between a father and child. And I heard from Gedolei Yisrael time and time again, it's mutter to be mishanas, and this is the way. You tell your children, my father, Zayda talked to me. I imagine his father talked to him, so I'm going to talk to you. It's a Messiah. You make it a Messiah. It's not personalized. It's not like I'm choshed you. You understand? It's a Messiah. There's a Messiah. And just as I was told, I'm passing it on to you. That there exist in the world some children and bestoma or adults, children or adults, you'll probably never meet them. Chances are you'll go through life and never bump into such a person, and I didn't. You could tell them I never bumped into such a person to reassure them. I never bumped into a person, Mommy never bumped into such a person. But I know they're out there, and they exist, and you may bump into such a person. And these people like to touch children in their private parts, or they like to encourage children to touch the adult or the older person, to touch them in their private parts. And again, I reassure you, it probably never happened. I never met such a person in my life. Never saw it. And bestama, it'll never happen to you. But just like my father told me and his father told him, it's my chiyuv to tell you. And you should tell your children this from the moment when they leave home, 5 years old, as soon as they go out to formal anywhere where they could be touched by older children. And you tell them that if it ever happens that someone comes over to you, and again, I'm telling you, it'll probably never happen. You'll probably never meet such a person in your whole life. I never met such a person. Keep reassuring them. But should you ever meet such a person, the first thing you say is no. And don't just say no, say not today. Maybe tomorrow. Because this way the person doesn't pressure them. If you give a little bit pas pasalo to you understand, the person who's trying to touch them, they don't pressure them. So you say not today, maybe tomorrow. Ask me tomorrow. First you say no. Then you go. You leave the scene and you tell me, mommy, or the principal of the school. Whoever your school principal is, you go to the principal of the school, you tell them what happened. No, go and tell. And you reassure them. You'll probably never meet such a person. We don't want our kids walking around terrified that in every corner is such a person. That's absurd. But we have to arm them with information and put it in the gedder of Messiah. It was told to me, I'm passing it on to you. And again, I never met such a person. And B'stoma, you'll never meet such a person. Abaluya tzu, you meet someone who wants to touch on your private parts, which means the parts of your body that are covered when you go swimming. Even when you go swimming, the parts of your body that are covered when you go swimming, someone wants to touch you on those parts or get you to touch them, you say, no, maybe tomorrow. Come back and ask me tomorrow. You go and you tell. We all have a chiyuv to tell this to our children. In my opinion, anyone, father, mother, who does not say this to their children when they leave home will be machshel their children. It's simply wrong. You have to give your children the information. And again, that doesn't guarantee it's not going to happen. I have plenty of people who told it to their children and it happened anyway. But let's give them some information. Let's give them the Messiah. Let's give them the chance. Tell them, Rabbi say. Everyone has to speak to your kids. And when you speak to your kids, a chazara at least once a year, every year, when they start school. If they go to camp, chazara. Every time, if they go to a sleepover, which is a makom sakana in my humble opinion. Sleepover is a pasha makom sakana. Unless it's like a really yotzim in a klal, you go to a chasna out of town and you send to your shvaga, and even then, it's a makom sakana. You should know sleepovers is a makom sakana. Most of the stories we hear of early childhood sexual abuse relate to sleepovers. So makom sakana. Tell your kids though, every time, once a year, the kolapachas from 5 years old and up. Tell them when they go to camp, tell them when they go to sleepover. Tell them. Don't be embarrassed to tell them, but don't make it frightening. Don't scare your kids. You tell them it's b'Messiah. My father told me, I never met someone, Baruch Hashem. Ich weiß nicht, aber it's Yidua, such people exist, and I'm just giving you information. Pasha, be relaxed about it. Don't be scared. Don't look frightened. And if you really, really, really can't do it, make sure someone else does. But I really implore you, every father should say this over to their children gently, respectfully, relaxed, Rabbi Sai, and loving, and put it in a geder of Messiah. Don't make it scary. We don't frighten the kids. And make sure you point out, I never met such a person. In fact, I don't even know someone who did. Obviously, but it's a fact, it happens sometimes, and therefore it's my chiyuv to tell you. Most parents, I won't do a show of hands, I've done it in the past, and had an honest show of hands. Most parents admit they've never done this. They've poshet never done it. So I implore you, Rabbi Sai, everyone do it. It's a simple little conversation. It doesn't scare the kids at all. By the way, I'll tell you something else that's interesting. When you do this conversation, and you do it with your kids all the way through school, do it all the way, up until bar mitzvah, you can do it all the way through. Do it when they go off to yeshiva. Have the conversation again and tell them, in yeshivas, there are kids who want to do these things. I'm just being ma'ira you. What to do in case it happens. You can always tell me. We should tell our kids about it. Again, without pachad, without panic. Just talk to them about it. And I can tell you, what you will discover is they're already aware and stories have already happened to your children. You will see will emerge. The Rabbanim and the therapists will have to deal with this, because what's going to happen once you all go home and talk to your kids gently is what you're going to discover is many of them have already had the experience. Do not panic. Do not panic. Seek help. Do not panic. Do not investigate. We'll come to that a little later. Just talk to them. But I want to say it very clearly. If they tell you something has happened, don't panic. I'm going to talk to you shortly about what you should do. But often, clearly, what you're not going to do is become Scotland Yard, investigating and being chiker, and trying to put them on a lie detector test and try and force information out of them. That's not what you're going to do. Don't panic. Thank them for sharing the information with you. If you're not sure what to do, and I'm going to explain shortly what you should do, then seek advice. Don't do anything. It's better to do nothing. You can always come back tomorrow and talk to them about it. If you're not sure, don't. Just don't talk. Just thank them and give them a hug and say, I'm proud of your bravery for sharing that with me. Don't do anything else till you know what to do. I want to be very clear. Look at the last piece, number 8 on this first page, second page. The secondary, more devastating trauma that children and later as adults have as a result of sexual abuse is they feel they cannot tell anyone, or if they do tell someone, that their reports will be discounted. One of the greatest problems we've seen, and I've witnessed in treatment, this is the trickiest problem in treatment, where a child reveals that someone played with them and touched them. And guess what? Much worse, the damage and trauma to the child of not being believed or being questioned, and someone's going to analyze and wants to know, and they look upset with them for getting someone else in trouble. That trauma, Rabbi Sai, is usually worse than the actual sexual trauma that occurred in the first place. When someone they love, they should be able to respect, they look up to, who should protect them, starts doubting them and questioning them. The trauma and betrayal of that experience is worse very often than the actual sexual trauma that occurred in the first place. And it's painful because it's often someone you know. With girls, it's very often someone, an older brother, a young uncle. Someone in the family system who's choshev. I've had grandfathers who've done it with their granddaughters. And the grandfather's a choshev a yid. And someone has rachmanis on him and the whole family system. Meanwhile, this poor little girl is devastated for life. Or poor little boy is devastated for life. The secondary trauma of not believing a victim is usually worse than the primary trauma of what happened to them in the first place. So if you go have this conversation, and you have the conversation with your child, what to do if it happens, no, go and tell. And they reveal that something happened, and they tell you who it is, and you can't handle it, Rabbi say, handle it. You have to handle it. Because if you don't, what you may be doing at that moment by doubting and questioning, by telling a child, you shouldn't talk that way, it's not sneerstic. You can't speak that way, you'll bring shame. Shame, it'll be a shanda to the mishpacha. You know what you're going to do to us if you report, if you tell anyone? The damage of that is worse, usually. Worse in terms of their tragic lives, the devastation of their lives, than what happened in the first place. So please be sensitive. If you go home tonight, or tomorrow, it's too late tonight, but when you speak to your kids, you should make a Kabbalah, everyone here, that before Shabbos you're going to talk to your kids. Don't go home, yeah, I'll get to it. Before this Shabbos, everyone's going to talk to their kids. You're going to say the go and tell. But I'm cautioning you that if your child, which is going to happen to some of you, it's a fact. Some of you will have this conversation before this Shabbos, and your children will tell you about things that have already happened when they see that they're safe to talk to you. Please don't doubt them. Don't question them. Don't ask for details. Seek advice. Seek counsel how you should talk to them. Praise them for their honesty in telling you. Zehu. Don't do anything else. Not till you've sought advice and counsel about what to do. Praise them. If little kids, incidentally, little children, ever start talking spontaneously, you know, sometimes little kids, they start babbling, then tape it. Tape it. Just put your phone on record. And just leave it there. And just listen to them. And don't ask. Just listen. Tape it. Because Masich lefi tumo, the truth comes out. There's another thing here. There should be number 9. You can write it if you want. I forgot to put it in. But the last one on this page should be number 9. I think yours is number 8. Am I right? And number 9 at the bottom of this page should be babysitting. I want to tell you a painful he'ora about babysitting. 2 very painful he'oras about babysitting. Unfortunately, we all need babysitters. Everyone's got simchas, a running, a hidden, and a hair, and we all need babysitters. I'm going to tell you 2 painful he'oras to be aware of, be ma'ira, the tzibur, because it's information you have to have. Firstly, it's common that kids who were abused and hurt struggle. They're not so in school anymore. They may be out of school. They're more available. They're not so involved at nighttime. Sweet kids, nice kids, but struggling. And they're more available for babysitters. Painfully, over the years of the work, I discovered that a whole chelik, 2 phenomena I put together anecdotally. One phenomenon was little kids, especially little boys, who told me they always felt they never had any memory of any sort whatsoever of being molested, being sexually abused, none, 0. And I believe them. It was clear that they were telling the truth. They weren't angry, they were just reporting, none. And yet they did know that from an extremely early age in life, they've always been playing with their private parts obsessively, since they're 3 years old. 2, 3 years old, they know they've always been playing with themselves, and no clue why. How I discovered this is not relevant. But once I discovered it, I did some research into it and discovered how prevalent it was, and I was absolutely stunned. How prevalent it was for struggling, abused boys and girls babysitters, especially the girl babysitters, who've been abused themselves, to use the private parts of children they were babysitting to pleasure themselves with. They had physical, visual stimulus in the home with no one around, and they would exploit the private parts of little kids they were babysitting. They discovered changing, as one girl told me, she discovered that little boys, when they change the diaper, sometimes they have a little kishri. And that led them to being sexualized. And they played with these little boys and girls. Early on, I did research on it. It was very difficult to do. But calling the parents and trying to work out who the babysitters were of these little boys especially, who grew up always pleasuring themselves, touching themselves from an age long, long before puberty, and then we put the dots together. After I connected the dots, I began almost routinely, when I interview kids, asking them if they've ever done this too, and was absolutely shocked to discover how prevalent it is. If you have a babysitter who your chayshed is a struggling kid themselves, take 2. I've never heard of it happening with 2. Take 2 kids, don't take 1. If you have a havamina, the kid you're using for babysitting is themselves a struggling kid who could be a victim. Take 2 of them. It costs more, but take 2. Don't take 1, it's too dangerous. Secondly, and this is hard just to come to terms with, but again, I've had too many stories. And is one story enough? I don't know. Maybe one story is enough. Of babysitters who themselves were victims of abuse by people coming home in the homes that they babysit at. This is a fact. Here in Shtad, the Mechanchim have told me about it. I know it's a fact elsewhere in the world, where kids, little kids, they're 9, 10 years old, little girls, are sent babysitting, unaware the older brothers come home from yeshiva because they know there's a babysitter, and they get these girls and compromise them. I've even had stories with fathers. I do not want to panic the oilam, please. And I'm scared to even say this to you. But be aware, in my opinion, there is such a 100% confident home. When you send your daughter to babysit, you can have 100% confidence nothing's going to happen to that child. We have to believe that, Rabbi Isai, or we're really doomed. We just simply have to believe it. And I do believe it. 100% I believe there are homes that I could have confidence, yeah, nothing's going to happen to this kid. But can I say this much to you? That unless you share that confidence, don't send your kid to babysit there until you have such confidence. If you have a suffix, if you have any doubt, don't send your kid babysitting. You need 100% confidence in your heart. Ask yourself the question, if I found out that something happened to my daughter babysitting or my son in this home, would I be shocked? Ask the question before you let your kid go babysitting. If you don't know the home yet, get to know the home. I'm sure they're nice people. But get to know them, please. And unless you're 100% confident, don't send your kid babysitting. Prevention, page 4. This we're going to run through. Children with one or more of these following attributes have an increased risk of being abused. These, I'm giving you 5 ideas here. Children with poor social skills, non-athletic, or with sweet, timid nature, because they need and crave the attention and affection, and they're vulnerable to older kids showing them affection or attention. They desperately need it, and they can be exploited very easily. Children with few friends, same idea. Children who crave attention of older children or adults. Children who are very secretive. And children who feel they are often not believed by adults, similar to the secretive. These are kids, especially if you have kids like this, you need to know where they are, when they are. You need to be on top of the situation. These are kids who are particularly vulnerable. Now, some basic tips on how to teach your children to be safe. First of all, there are a couple of books, nice books, about good touch, bad touch, that are not, they won't sexualize your children. They're written by frum people. I mentioned one here, published by Masorah, Art Scroll Masorah, called Let's Stay Safe. It's an excellent book, and it should be read together. So it's a lovely, it is not a book that's going to sexualize your child. In all our machnas, every one of us, we're all safe using this book. You should read the book with your child, or your wife should read the book with your child. Probably your wife should. I think mothers seem to do a better job of this than men do for some reason. But by all means, if you feel safe doing it, do it. Read a book with your kids about staying safe, about what's good touch, bad touch. It should become something understood in your home that there's something as good touch and there's bad touch. There's safe touch. Let's talk about it. Let's get the book and let's read it with the kids. Not obsessively, but let's read it. Once a year you can review it together with your kids again. Use it. Have the book around. Let it be in the culture of the home as one of the books on the shelf. It's not explicit, Rabbi say. There's nothing bad in the book. Let the kids talk about it. It may open them up. It'll safeguard them. It'll help safeguard them. If your child often seeks close relationships with adults, find him a mentor. A lot of these out-of-sync kids, they're just not with the program, like I said, not so athletic, they're not so good in learning. They seek attention. They want the attention, they crave it from older adults. They can easily be exploited. Get them an older adult. Get them a healthy mentor. Get a Rebbe to learn with him who's going to be a mentor. It's not about the learning, it's about the relationship. Get someone, provide someone for him so he doesn't have to go seek it himself. Ensure that your children know they can inform you if something or someone makes them feel uncomfortable. Watch your reaction. There's a phenomena that happens with very little children. It does not happen with older children, nor does it happen with teenagers. But it happens with very little children called false memory syndrome. I want to mention it. A little child, you can go home from a kinus like tonight. My goal, and Rejna said it clearly, is not to scare or terrify. It's to inform. If I've scared and terrified you, please tell me afterwards I did it. It's not my intention. It's my intention to give you information. If a child reports and tells you, and you feel that something's happened, watch your reaction. And I want to tell you why. Because you can ask a little child, a 2 or 3-year-old, this only occurs with very little kids. You can ask a little kid, somehow you're reading the book with them about good touch, bad touch, and you say to little Chaim, Chaim, no one ever touched you, right? No one touched you. And you go like this with your head, and he says, no one touched me. Because kids mimic you. And you could say to your kid, if you're chayshed, because you went through this and you heard this evening, and you think maybe something did happen, and you say to your kid, did someone touch you? That's all it takes, Rabbi say. That's all it takes. Did someone touch you? And almost any kid, 2 or 3-year-old, will look at you and go, And the horrendous damage of that moment sometimes takes years. The longest one I had was over a decade, and a father being divorced, thrown out the house, until finally what came out was simply that the parent had been at an evening like this, where the person didn't explain this phenomena, thought they understood that the father had done something inappropriate, and the mother said, "Did Tati touch you?" It took us 10 years to exonerate this man. Over 10 years. This only occurs with little kids. If your child tells you something, what's your reaction? Children seek little kids. They have magical thinking. They seek our approval. So when you start nodding with a little kid, guess what? Look, some of you are nodding just now as I'm nodding. It's like the neshama just reacts that way. It's unavoidable. And then you see them nodding, and you say, "Oh, it did happen." And they said, "Yes." And next thing you know, the police are called in and the whole thing. And now the kid has to keep saying yes, because guess what? There's this whole tarum, this whole matzav happened because he said yes. What's your reaction? What's your reaction equally that you don't shut down your kid? Because very often they will tell you, you may go home and talk to them before Shabbos, and they may tell you a story about someone touching them, and guess what? That's someone you love, someone you respect, and they tell you that. What's your reaction? Because equally, you can say, no, I'm sure that didn't happen. And the kid says, okay. And so it didn't happen. Little kids, I'm talking about little kids. This doesn't happen with adolescents and with teenagers. But it does happen with little kids who have magical thinking. What's your reaction? With an older teenager, especially the girls, first time sexual abuse usually happens with someone they know very well, who's probably part of your family or close friends. Someone who has access to her. Almost certainly someone in the family. And the shock and revelation tends to make some people have a knee-jerk reaction of denial. No, you can't mean, I'm sure you misunderstood. And really what we're saying is, I can't deal with it. That's really what we're saying. I can't deal with it. The implication of what you're telling me is so devastating, so I'm sure you misunderstood. What's your reaction? Chances are what they're telling you is true. It's sad, but it's true. I want to make a comment at this point about perpetrators. You have to realize what's the subject. The noisev tonight was not adult, male pedophiles who are sociopaths. We're not talking about them. We're not talking about criminal acts of pedophilia. We're talking about little kids, older kids, all kids under 20. They're all the first time they do this stuff. They're young. And every one of those, so to speak, abusers was a victim. It's rare, does happen, but it's rare that someone just starts doing this unless it happened to them. It's rare. It does happen. But the vast majority of every one of them, they're victims themselves. And they all need help. Rabbi said they all need help. The victims, the abusers, the abusees, everyone, they're all victims, Nebuch. So what's your reaction? Years ago, many years ago, when I was trained, we used to talk about villains and victims. There were villains and there were victims. The one who did it and the one it was done to. Villains and victims. Then we noticed, at least I did, that about a third of the kids in treatment got worse in treatment, not better. And then I thought, why? Because a third of the victims became the villains. So if you misyaches to the one who did it as a villain, they lie. Because when you're talking to a victim, when you're talking to a victim, you're misyaches with a notion of villains and victims, and you're just the victim. It happened to you, it's not your fault. You got to realize that about 1 in 3 of them have already started doing it to other people. So now they'll never tell you, and you're traumatizing them. You're actually causing more trauma because you're the victim, you're not the villain. Because Lu Yitsuya, you were the villain, we'd throw you out. But a third have repeated. What's your reaction, Rabbi Say? Get rid of language or concepts or notions of villains and victims. Get rid of it. I think in terms of accountability and responsibility. I talk to the young people in terms of accountability and responsibility. You're not accountable for what happened to you. Das is min hashamayim. I don't know why it happened to you. Aber das is min hashamayim. But you are responsible not to repeat it. From this moment, from now that you've entered treatment, now that you've admitted it to me, now that you've acknowledged to me, even if you did it to other kids before, you're not accountable for what happened to you or what you did as a result of what happened to you until now. Now you're responsible to take responsibility, not to hurt anyone else. Accountability and responsibility is something we, in our world, we can support that. So we don't have to be misyaches to children as villains, as evil. They are victims, even them. And guess what? They're treatable. And they're chalashing for treatment. But not if we look at it as villains and victims. And that's how they look at themselves, as the villain. That's why they don't tell us. So we have to make a shina in the language to accountability and responsibility. And even if you did it because it was done to you, for this you're not accountable. You're responsible now to get help, to fix the problem. Frequently invite your children to speak to you about anything they would like. You have to create an environment in your home where your children feel safe to talk to you. Encourage them to talk. Kids love talking. Get them talking and schmoozing about anything. If you suspect that something's happened to them, invite them to talk with you. But you shouldn't force them. You need to invite them. Tell them you can talk about anything. They need to understand this is the theme of your home. Your child needs to know they can come to you. They can come and talk to you. Most kids report to me why they didn't go is because they didn't feel safe. They thought their parents were going to blame them. They thought their parents would look at them as bad, and they never sought help. Kids, little girls who were abused in bed by an older brother at night, in the middle of the night, and the first time she was simply too terrified, poshet, too terrified to even cry out. She didn't know what was happening. She was scared out of her wits. She was ashamed and embarrassed. And at the exact same time, Nebuch, there was some excitement. Maim genuvim yim taku. There was some excitement in what was going on too. And she didn't call out. And now she concludes that because I didn't go and tell my parents, that if it ever happens again, I can never tell them. I can never tell them. Because they'll say to me, why didn't you come to me the first time? And guess what? Countless parents tell me that. That's exactly what happened. The kids, years later, we find out, and the first words out the parents were, why didn't she come and tell me? She didn't come to tell you because she didn't feel safe. We, parents, have a responsibility to create an environment in our homes where our kids are safe to tell us anything. We must work on that environment where they feel safe and secure, and we don't get shocked and overreact and shut them down and get scared of them. It's crucial in prevention of abuse that we create such a milieu, such an environment in our homes. If your child comes to talk to you, create an environment to hear the disclosure. First of all, listen. Just listen. Don't ask questions. If they come to talk to you, listen. You could say, tell me more. Don't ask details. The reason you don't ask details is very simple. Because very often children have magical thinking. You ask, did it happen with this one? Did it happen here? Were you there? Were you wearing this? Was he wearing that? You ask questions, kids think that that's the answer that you're looking for. Don't ever ask questions till someone explains to you how to do it. Please don't do it. Just listen. If you have to ask anything, just ask in a very gentle, non-judgmental way. Is there anything else you would like to share with me? Is there any other stories you would like to share? But don't push them for details. Please, don't ever push them. You can drain them a cup where they never know because they tell you and they answer your questions and they can never know what did happen or didn't happen. Please. Validate them. Make them feel safe. Stay calm. Don't freak out and become crazy. Don't start crying and running around the house. Everything calm. Everything ba'adinut. Don't panic. And then seek advice. I'm telling you, when I'm working with a family that follow these guidelines, all these stories are treatable. We can treat all of this if we get it early enough in life with a supportive family, and you get it early enough, it's treatable. Seek help immediately. The sooner the child is helped, the less likely the impact of the trauma. On the last two pages, I just want to highlight behaviors that may be associated with sexual abuse. This you could read yourself afterwards. You don't need me to go through it with you, but please, the pieces in bold, please note that the presence of any of these symptoms does not definitively mean that your child was abused. One of the great dangers of evenings like this is you're given a little information, and a little information, unfortunately, is too much information because it's not the whole information. So then everyone goes home thinking, I already know the sugya now. What we've given you is just a little information to be ma'ira the sugya. Just to be ma'ira. But please, there's no way on earth you have enough information unless your child tells you directly, definitively. I'm simply giving you guidelines and information. Seek advice and help. If you see behaviors like the ones listed on these pages, seek counsel, but do not conclude it must have happened. Equally, comparably, if you have a suspicion that the child may have been abused, the absence of these symptoms should not be taken as a sign that a mental health consultation is unnecessary. So you don't go through this list and say, oh, they don't have these, so it must be that they're not abused. That's also not true. So the presence of these symptoms doesn't mean they were abused. Am I being clear? The lack of these symptoms doesn't mean that they were not abused. We're giving you guidelines. Zehu, be a chacham. Be a chacham. If you have a suffix, a doubt, don't panic. Get a consultation with a mental health professional and work all this through. The ikar of the night, Rabbi says, to realize this is real. It truly happens in our homes. We're not just thinking about the perpetrator on the dirty raincoat and the dirty old man. We're talking about our own children doing these things to each other. The results are absolutely devastating to their lives. So let's hope that together, and mitzvah Hashem zol deibish to helfen, that we will keep our children safe.